So Mr. Anderson or Mr. Wooldridge, if you can change Garrick Cherugi to Peter Leffler, we'd appreciate it. I would appreciate it. Mr. Leffler, there, thank you. And we're getting Mr. Durbin hooked up.
Ask him again. Ask. I won't.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. It looks like we're still trying to get the audio connection for Mr. Durbin. But we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. My name is Alan Lilly. I'm the presiding hearing officer of the State Water Board's Administrative Hearings Office. Today is Friday, October 28th, 2022. It's just after 10 a.m. This is the third day of the AHO's hearings on the reference from the Monterey County Superior Court in City of Marina versus RMC Lonestar to the State Water Resources Control Board. It looks like everybody is the same appearances as the last 2 days, so I'm not going to ask for appearances again. We'll just go ahead and get started. My plan is to do my questions of the three witnesses who testified yesterday first, and then we'll have any redirect by Cal-Am's attorneys if they want to. I suspect my questions will take approximately 2 hours. I'm probably not as good as all of you were yesterday in estimating that, so it may be more or less. Regardless, I do plan to take a lunch break and then during that break to confer with my staff to see whether I've missed anything. Frankly, this is new to all of us, and it's technically fairly complex, and there are a lot of new terms, so I'm having to get up to speed. I know all of you have been working on this project for quite some time, but we're just getting up to speed. So that's why it may take us a little longer, and some of my questions may seem fairly basic or not on point, but that's why, and I apologize, but we have to understand this material as best we can. So that's my plan. I know for some of you, there may be some schedule conflicts, but this was a hearing date that we had set. We will finish as early as we can today, but it will probably be sometime this afternoon. So before I start, are there any preliminary matters that anybody wants to address this morning?
I just thought we should do a sound check for Mr. Durbin.
I think that's a good idea. Mr. Durbin, we can see you. Speak.
I'm here, I hope.
You are very good. We can hear you fine. It's a little quiet. I don't know if there's any volume you can turn up, but we can certainly hear you fine. So good. And thank you for participating again. You get the award for the longest distance participant today by far. Okay. Well, with that, just let me get my notes going here. I am going to keep track of my time. It only seems fair. We'll see how we go. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Leffler. It's a reminder to you and to Dr. Ye and Mr. Durbin, you all still are under oath. And I'm going to ask Ms. Mullen to display exhibit Cal-Am 104, which is the file of your slides, and to move to slide 4. Okay, so thank you, Ms. Mullen. So let me get the right one. So, Mr. Leffler, these are the court's questions, and I understand you just quoted them from the court's order. Question 5 reads, is it likely that any of the proposed draw will A, lower the groundwater table, or B, reduce the storage space in any source other than seawater? And if so, can the extent be approximated? Do you see that question here?
Yes.
Okay. And this isn't I'm a little sensitive because I'm potentially criticizing the judge here, but I'm confused at the term storage space here. Should this question actually be a question of whether there'd be reductions in the amounts of groundwater stored rather than the storage space?
Yeah, it could perhaps be phrased a little better, but yeah, I interpreted that to be more of a change in groundwater storage volume, which, of course, would take into account, not just the soil volume, but the specific yield or if it's a confined aquifer, the storativity to get to a volume calculation.
Okay, but it's a volume of water, not a capacity volume. Is that correct?
That was my understanding.
Okay. And this is an analogy I came up with this morning. And I'm just going to ask you whether you think I'm sort of have this right. I think of the analogy as I can look at a parking lot and I can count how many parking spaces there are when the lot is empty. And that to me is storage space. But then if I look at the number of cars parked in the parking lot, that's basically how much of that storage space is occupied. So the number of cars is sort of like the amount of water stored in the aquifer. Is that a reasonable, if simple analogy?
I guess, yeah, if you had a parking lot with a lot of cars parked in it, I guess I might think of it more as the cars are kind of like the sand grains maybe, and then the water is in between the cars. If you had, of course, you'd have to have the cars packed very tightly together because obviously the soil occupies a lot larger space than is remaining for the water.
Okay, well, that shows that my analogy is probably not very good. Let's go, if Ms. Mullen, if you can just shift over to Exhibit CalAm 3 and move to page 40. And go down to the bottom of the page to paragraph 110 and specifically lines 23 through 26. So I'm going to just read this. This is from your written testimony, Mr. Leffler. It states, essentially no groundwater storage space would be reduced outside the area of seawater intrusion. No groundwater storage space reduction in usable non-seawater intruded zones would occur, parentheses, or at least the storage space reduction would be so small as to be considered negligible. And I understand you were trying to answer the court's question, so I'm not criticizing you, but is it really more accurate here to talk about groundwater storage rather than groundwater storage space?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I was, trying to use the words in the question, but it's really the groundwater storage volume.
Okay, thank you.
The water volume. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Ms. Mullen, if you can shift back to Exhibit CalAm 104 now and go to slide 9. We'll be switching between these two files. Okay, so here in slide 9, Mr. Leffler, we were wondering, there on the right side of each of the roughly, I'll say ovals, there's a purple oval and a blue oval. There's a large indentation sort of right in that goes, I'll say it goes from the right toward the direction of the proposed Calam slant well. So do you see those indentations?
Yes.
And can you explain to us why the modeling shows those indentations there?
Yes. So the outline there of the capture zone is based on particle tracking and flow paths of particles. So it's tracking a certain number. Seems like I'm getting an echo on my end.
Okay, if somebody else can go, if you're not speaking, please go on mute. That should help us. So just Mr. Leffler and I are off mute right now. Go ahead.
So there, my understanding of how this was done is there are particles used to track back from the wells, the flow paths, and so this boundary is sort of mirrors the particle that kind of takes the longest flow path, and so it kind of flows along that or right next to that boundary that you see there. So it's basically, I think it's a function of the sort of the particle tracking methodology and how the particles track. So, for example, you'd have a particle that would kind of follow that blue line and say up to the north and kind of follow along that blue line and into the ocean. So I think that's the outermost sort of particle that was tracked backwards.
Okay, so with these indentations in the capture zones, does that mean the model is indicating that the wells are not obtaining, I'll say, groundwater from inland sources directly to the right of the wells?
No, I think that it probably not. I mean, probably it would extend extend back a little bit further.
I'm sorry, extend a little bit further back than what's shown in the model, or what?
Well, I think it's a function of the particle tracking method, and so I think that you could probably, those indentations are probably the line should sort of be connected, without the indentations.
Okay, actually, my staff has pointed out that this modeling was done by Dr. Ye. So maybe at this point I should just ask Dr. Ye. Dr. Ye, if you're there, can you give us any further information? Maybe it wasn't fair to ask Mr. Leffler. It's a fairly detailed modeling question, but Dr. Ye, do you have any further explanation as to why these capture zones have these large indentations on the right side in this figure?
Okay, yeah. That will be a function of the hydraulic gradient. So in this case, I'm not sure the assumption for this one, but when I look at this, I think the hydraulic gradient for the aquifer, it's a landwall hydraulic gradient. So if you see my testimony, I have 3 different scenarios. You will see that mixing zone will be different, and also I indicate the section line for the inland water entering the mixing zone.
Okay.
Sorry, I just want to interject that this was actually work by Hydrofocus, I believe.
Oh, okay. Okay. Was this for the 2016 modeling then?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, let's go on to slide 13. So going back to you, Mr. Leffler, this figure does not show any aquitard between the dune sand aquifer and the 180-foot aquifer. Is that correct, that there is no aquitard between those two aquifers?
Yes. So west of the FOSVA, there's no aquitard between the dune sand aquifer and the 180. So they're effectively, operating as one unit there. And then, I think from the data we have that we think that, it extends a little bit beneath the FOSVA, that technically that's probably part of the dune sand aquifer there, coarser grain section beneath the FOSVA. But yeah, bottom line, there's no aquitard there.
So why are they designated as different aquifers if there's no aquitard between them?
I think it has to do with the depositional environment, and that they're different. They were deposited in a different way, and I think maybe traditionally it was thought that the dune sand aquifer is only on top of the FOSVA, in the more inland portion where the FOSVA exists. So I think it had been defined previously as a separate aquifer there, and that that FOSVA pinched out, and so they just that portion of the dune sand aquifer that was west of the FOSVA was referred to as the dune sand aquifer, because they had a similar depositional history. So I think it's a sort of a function of just the history of the development of the understanding, that again, it was at one time it was the dune sand aquifers above the FOSVA and the 180s immediately below it. But I think that more recent information indicates there may be a little bit of dune sand aquifer below it. So the separate aquifers are really the perch mounded aquifer, and then the that dune sand 180 below it.
Okay, so and then because this shows the dune sand aquifer extending in and below the FOSVA, but you're saying it actually can be above the FOSVA?
Yeah, sorry. So the dune sand aquifer includes the perched, what we refer to as the perched mounded aquifer.
Okay.
And actually, I mean, this might be a good point of clarification, because there's been a lot of studies, for not just our work, but for the Monterey Peninsula landfill, which is inland of the project, and then for the Fort Ord area. And that aquifer that sits above the FOSVA has different names in different studies. And so for the Monterey Peninsula landfill, they refer to it as the 35-foot aquifer. In the Fort Ord area, they refer to it as the A aquifer. And so there's these different names for that aquifer, but with the understanding that the 35-foot aquifer is part of the dune sand aquifer, and the A aquifer is part of the dune sand aquifer. And within the HWG, we adopted this term perched mounded aquifer because we thought it sort of better described what it is, that it's either perched or mounded. And I think, of course, there's some uncertainty in any given area whether it's perched or mounded, and the difference is really where I kind of note there. that there's a possible unsaturated zone beneath the FOSVA. I mean, in some areas, there may not be an unsaturated zone there, in which case it's more of a mounded aquifer. And then if there is an unsaturated zone there, then it's more of a, what's traditionally referred to as a perched aquifer.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that explanation. Let's go on to slide 17. Okay, the third bullet here states capture zone boundary added, illustrative as dependent on gradient. Flow in capture zone is towards slant well. Thus, seawater intrusion that previously flowed toward MCWD wells is intercepted by slant well. Do you see that?
Yes.
So my question is, will all of the seawater that currently flows toward the MCWD wells be intercepted by the Cal-Am slant wells if they begin operation, or just some of that inward flow?
Yeah, so I guess first of all, this schematic, represents, sort of, if you were to, sort of have a line between the slant wells and the MCWD wells. And, it sort of assumes that the flow is, from, the direction of flow is from one to the other, which I think maybe Dr. Ye pointed out yesterday isn't necessarily the case, that the flow may be, not exactly in that direction. But if we're assuming that it is for the purposes of this discussion, and that, water, to the extent that water from the FOSVA on top of the FOSVA would flow over the edge of the western edge of that, and then flow back inland towards those wells, and that at the same time seawater is flowing along that same flow path, then that seawater would be intercepted along that flow path. So within the area of the capture zone. But outside of the capture zone, where seawater had previously been flowing towards the well, towards the MCWD wells, like it had been in the slant well area when they weren't pumping, that water would continue to flow towards the MCWD wells.
Okay. Okay, let's go to slide 19, please. Okay, so Mr. Leffler, in this figure shows the 180 foot, 400, I'll try again, 180, 400 aquitard as completely impermeable. Is that correct, that that's what this figure shows?
I think it shows that it's an aquitard. I wouldn't consider it completely impermeable, but it certainly greatly restricts the vertical flow of water.
Okay, and then I guess I'll just ask the same question for the 400 deep aquitard. Is that the same answer, that it's not completely impermeable, but it restricts the flow?
Yes, although that's a much thicker aquitard. I think that one is on the order of 200 to 300 feet thick. So that's that's what I was trying to depict there, that it's a bit thicker.
Okay, all right. So Ms. Mullen, if you can shift over to Exhibit Cal-Am 3 again and go to page 17 on this topic. And down to paragraph 52. Okay, good. So I'm going to start at line 17 here, Mr. Leffler. It says the overall lack of significant hydraulic communication between the 180-foot aquifer, 400-foot aquifer, and the deep aquifer insulates each from the others, especially within the area of influence of the proposed MPWSP. Do you see that sentence?
Yes.
Okay, so my first question is, what do you mean by hydraulic communication? I'll just say my technical experts aren't familiar with that term, and they're wondering if it's the same as hydraulic connection.
Yeah, sort of the hydraulic connection, relative to the vertical flow of water through the aquitard.
Okay, and you did previously well, first of all, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but the following paragraphs on the next several pages, I have paragraphs 54 through 59. I think you're probably familiar with them, but if you need to briefly read them to yourself, that's fine. But they state several reasons for your conclusion about this the overall lack of significant hydraulic communication. And I guess I just want to ask the same question. You've said that there potentially could be some flow between the two aquifers. Is there any way you can quantify that or give us any indication beyond just the qualitative terms?
I think that's so that's a question that depends on a specific scenario of pumping. And that's a question that could be addressed by the model in terms of the extent of leakage that might occur under a certain conditions. I think in a very general sense, there's currently overall on average downward flow direction between the 180 and the 400, just existing conditions without the slant well, because the ground water levels are higher in the 180 than the 400. So, one potential effect of the slant wells is that it would actually reduce that downward flow from the 180 to the 400, because you'd be lowering the groundwater levels in the 180 and not really have any significant lowering in the 400. So that reduces the vertical gradient, which then reduces the amount of that leakage.
Okay, I'm going to come back to this with Dr. Ye when I ask more questions about the modeling. So Dr. Ye, I'll just warn you that I'm going to ask later, but I think it's easier if I do it in the context of well, actually, I'll just ask you now since we're on this. In the 2022 NV, I've got to get this right, NMGBM, what does the model assume about the hydraulic connectivity between the 180 aquifer and the 400 aquifer?
So you mean the hydraulic conductivity for the 180, 400 equitar?
Correct.
Okay. I have to take a look my report, but it's in general it's very low, because that is the equitar. So both the horizontal hydraulic conductivity and the vertical hydraulic conductivity values are very low compared to the aquifer.
Okay. And while we're on that, would changes in the model assumption of that, what you call very low conductivity, would that significantly change the 2022 model results for your modeling work?
My 2022 report already incorporate that in my model.
I understand, but you've made an assumption about the conductivity of this aquitard in the model. Is that correct?
Correct.
And my question is, if you change that assumption in the model in some way that would increase that conductivity through that aquitard, would that significantly change the modeling results?
For the modeling results, depending on what impact we talk about, if it's a change in water level with without project, usually a higher hydraulic conductivity and a lower vertical hydraulic conductivity will have a smaller cone of depression. And the lower horizontal hydraulic conductivity, higher vertical hydraulic conductivity will have a larger cone of depression due to the project pumping. So to answer to you, yes, we'll change that. Then for the ocean water percentage, the aquifer parameters is not that sensitive to that. In general, it's sensitive to the amount of groundwater pumping, also the hydrology, that reflecting the amount of recharge. So those are pretty much based on all the past modeling results from 2015, 2016, and our 2022 modeling runs.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, could I just add that
Go ahead.
That's part of the model calibration as well. So if you change that vertical K in the aquitard, it's possible that that will result in a model calibration that's not as good.
Okay, well, I think that's a pretty important point. Thank you for pointing that out. And you can see how little I know about all of this, but I'm learning fast. So thank you. Okay, so Mr. Leffler, we'll go back to you. And I'd like Ms. Mullen to display exhibit CalAm 6. And please go to PDF page 4. And then scroll down to section 2. So that's good, thank you. So Mr. Leffler, again, I'm learning fast, or trying to learn fast. You have discussed the difference between capture zones and mixing zones in your written testimony and your last 2 days of testimony. And I just am going to ask a couple of very basic questions. For capture zones, what are the units that capture zones are measured in?
So a capture zone is basically based on you have groundwater flow in one certain direction, and you have a certain gradient associated with that. And the units for gradient are just feet over feet. And then so there's an equation that I think, kind of accounts for the units, but in addition to the gradient would be the hydraulic conductivity or transmissivity, which is the K value times the aquifer thickness, and the pumping rate of the well, so that thickness is a K value would be feet per day, for example, and a transmissivity would be feet squared per day. And then a pumping rate would be, units of, GPM or converted to like feet cubed per day. But basically, so the formula, if you just go back to the basic formula, it's the units are feet. What it captures, what the formula gives you is what's called the stagnation point, which is the distance down gradient of the pumping well, where you're at the boundary of the capture zone. And then the other thing that you derive from that, so that's, that would be in a distance units of feet. And then the other thing that the equation provides is the width of the capture zone, sort of the up gradient width of the capture zone. So it's a sort of a dimensional, the units are sort of distance, I guess, in feet, down gradient for the stagnation point, and then feet for the width.
Okay, that's fairly clear. Thank you. I mean, I'm sure you're stating as clearly as it can be. It's sinking in fairly clear in my mind. Now for mixing zones, go ahead. I'm sorry if I interrupted.
Yeah, I want to just add a little thing to what Peter said. One way of thinking about a capture zone is that within the groundwater system, there's effectively, Peter's previously mentioned, bathtub. And the pumping well of interest is inside the bathtub, and there's no flow, groundwater flow across any of the bottom or walls of this bath. So it represents the area or volume, actually a better term, the volume from which the well is drawing water, and it's only within that volume, not outside that volume, that water is being drawn.
Okay, thank you. So you're basically saying there's a third dimension to that capture zone, which I appreciate that clarification. Okay, so now mixing zones, Mr. Leffler, again, if you can explain that, I think by explaining the units of those, that may help me understand better the difference between a capture zone and a mixing zone.
Yeah, so it's a similar concept, except, I mean, really, so a capture zone is really only applies when the groundwater flow is in one direction. Now, if you have a situation where, one or more aquifers are flowing in the opposite direction, then you sort of have something else, which, is the mixing zone. So sort of the units are the same. And really the main difference is that, depending on the, what's happening for the groundwater flow, the amount of groundwater flow in the opposite direction, there's some amount of that enters into this mixing zone. So the distinction is that within the mixing zone, most of the water, again, the vast majority of water coming from the ocean. The mixing zone represents the flow paths that come from the ocean. So the flow paths that come from the ocean occur within that mixing zone. And outside of the mixing zone, the slant wells would not be, there would not be flow paths from the ocean water into the slant wells. So it's, so that gives the same sort of result as if you had just a capture zone with the flow in one direction. That shows you the flow paths, in this case, coming from the ocean into the slant wells. And then there's no flow from the inland direction in the capture zone. But in the mixing zone, you have the small contribution from the up gradient direction. And as far as defining those, again, that's determined by particle tracking and modeling.
Okay, well, so, okay, that I understand that, but so when is it appropriate for us to consider capture zones, and when should we be considering mixing zones?
So capture zones should be considered when there's only inland flow directions in the two aquifers. If there is seaward flow in one or both aquifers, then we have to look at mixing zones.
Okay. All right, so Ms. Mullen, if you can put up exhibit CalAm 79 and go to PDF page 41. I think if you can scroll down, I just, if you can scroll down to the bottom, I want to make sure I have the right text page. I'm looking for text page 33. Yeah, good. I do have it. Okay, so numbered paragraph 3, right, which is displayed right here, states, as described in section 2 of my direct testimony appendix, CalAm 6, capture zones only apply in the context used in this hearing when inland groundwater gradients are occurring in both aquifers. In cases of mixed gradients, one seaward and one landward, or both seaward gradients, then mixing zones are more appropriate. Are more appropriate to define and apply for the purposes used in this proceeding, e.g. discussion of how ocean water migrates into capture zone areas. So, okay, so I now understand this. So capture zones, inland gradients means the pre-development condition is the groundwater is flowing from the sea toward the land in both of the aquifers. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. Let me just check one thing here. I don't know if we need to go to this. Okay, that clarifies that. Thank you. Okay, so Ms. Mullen, if you can go to exhibit CalAm 78 and go to page 4, paragraph 6. Okay, at lines 8 through 11, it says mixing zones used in my direct testimony where appropriate should be used instead of capture zones used in Ms. Nelson's testimony when mixing zones should have been used when mixing seaward and landward gradients in a model run. Do you see that?
Yes.
So, and that's consistent with what you just explained. So what my question is, and I don't understand how these are used in model runs. So can you explain how capture zones and mixing zones are used in model runs?
Yes. So I'm getting an echo again.
I'm sorry. I've asked everyone to go on mute except for the people who are actually speaking. So I'm not sure where that echo is coming from. I'll just ask Dr. Ye, if you can go on mute until we call on you, that may help. So, and yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And Mr. Moore, unless you have something to say, if you can go on mute as well, that would help us.
I am at this point, yeah.
You're not shown as being on mute. That's why I'm asking.
It's,
You may be the source of the echo.
okay, I'll try again.
There you go.
Oh.
Good. Oh, you were, then you went off. Whatever you did was good, and then it went away. So try clicking again.
Well, I will. It looks like.
There you go. You're good. All right, Mr. Leffler, see if that helps. And my question is, please explain how capture zones and mixing zones are used in model runs.
Okay, so my understanding is, and I think if Johnson has anything to add, he could, or corrections to what I say, he can do so. But in terms of modeling, you develop the groundwater flow model, and then so that kind of gives you the groundwater flow paths and so forth. And then you use a particle tracking method to track particles, and you can do that in two ways. You can put particles around the wells and then backtrack how they get to the wells, and that gives you flow paths. Or you could, and that's backward tracking of particles. Or you could do forward tracking, where you put the particles, in the up gradient directions, and then follow those flow paths to the slant wells. Another way to look at it, and maybe at least in terms of the mixing zones, is there's something called zone budget in ModFlow, where you can isolate certain areas and see where the water's flowing through just that area or those cells. So that's, from a modeling standpoint, how, again, for a given scenario with, whatever those inputs are for that scenario, you would define either a capture zone or a mixing zone.
Okay, so it sounds like those are then used for analyzing or understanding the model output rather than affecting the model inputs. Is that correct?
Right. It's an output of a given model run, and whatever and it counts for whatever were the inputs in that model run, or whatever the model inputs were. Then this reflects, this is one of the outputs that you can get from a model run.
Okay.
Mr. Liddy, can
Go
I
ahead,
add
Dr. Ye.
Yeah. So this is one technique using a model, a flow model output to quantify the amount of ocean water percentage. So like the particle tracking use the model flow output to delineate the capture zone. Then we can do a water balance for the mixing zone. How much flow from ocean and how much flow from inland. Then you do the mass balance to quantify the amount of ocean water percentage. That's one technique. But also, if like a transient model, you can do solute transport model, then just take a look at the output from the stem well pumping. Then you can also quantify the ocean water percentage.
Okay, so I assume that's basically using the mixing zone then. Is that right?
For the solute transport model, because the model already calculated the ocean water percentage for each of the model cell. So you just need to look at the concentration pumped from the well. We don't need to do the mixing zone. So
Okay.
that's two different approach. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go back to you, Mr. Leffler, although Dr. Ye, you may want to add something on this. During yesterday's hearing, you testified that CalAmp slant well pumping may cause some small drawdowns outside the well's capture zones. Do you remember stating that?
Yes.
And this seems counterintuitive to me. Can you explain how this could happen?
Sure. So to determine a capture zone, you have a certain gradient. Actually, I think there might be a good figure in the EIR that shows this. That might make it a lot clearer, but I'll try to explain it verbally. So you have a certain gradient before you add in the pumping of the well. And so it has a certain surface to it. And let's say it's flowing inland. And then you add the pumping of the well, and that creates a cone of depression. And so, the greatest drawdowns are certainly within the capture zone, but that stagnation point that I mentioned earlier, down gradient of the pumping well, at a certain point, you have enough drawdown to overcome that original gradient that brings the water back towards the pumping well. But then the remaining drawdown outside that capture zone isn't enough to reverse the original gradient. So you have some drawdown, but it wasn't enough to reverse the gradient back towards the well. So,
Okay.
yeah, and I believe there's a figure in the EIR that, may explain that,
Okay, well, that would be helpful. So you don't need to get it now, you're busy, but when we have a break, if you can make a note to see if you can find that, and then we can look at it, that would be very helpful for me.
Okay.
So, and I don't know,
Well,
Dr. Ye, is there anything you want to add on this about the 2022 modeling results, and about whether they show any drawdowns outside the well's capture zones?
Yes, yeah. I think the differences is like the capture zone it's only involve the model scenario with the project pumping. But the lowering of the water level due to the project pumping, that involve comparison two model runs with and without the project pumping. So then that change in water level may be slightly different compared to the mixing zone.
Okay, do you happen to know if there are any figures in your exhibits that show that?
We have the change in water level, but we have not overlay that on the mixing zone.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Mullen, can you please just put up exhibit Cal-Am 25? Okay, and I believe this was discussed yesterday, and this shows the drawdowns of various amounts, and the lowest drawdown shown here is 1 foot. So we were just wondering for either Mr. Leffler or Dr. Ye, are there any figures in Cal-Am's exhibits that show the drawdowns of less than 1 foot for this? This is for the 180 aquifer, but also for the dune sand aquifer. Because that question was brought up yesterday. Are there any other figures that show the further out contours with the drawdowns of less than 1 foot?
So I don't recall that we had presented that or that I had presented that in my testimony. I don't recall if that's shown in previous reports.
Okay, Dr. Ye, do you know if any of your exhibits show the less than 1 foot drawdown contours?
I don't recall.
Okay. Okay, let's go to exhibit Cal-Am 89, please, and PDF page 23. Okay, and if you can scroll down, that's good. The third paragraph states, baseline monitoring of groundwater levels and water quality using the MPWSP monitoring network was conducted during the period of February 19, 2015 to April 10, 2015. Between the start of the monitoring and the commencement of the TSW long-term pumping test, 5 weekly reports were prepared and made available to the public on the project website, and so forth. And then there has been discussion about how the monitoring continued during the pump test. And my question for either Mr. Leffler or Dr. Ye is, did anybody calculate the transmissivity and storativity of the dune sand aquifer or 180-foot aquifer based on these pump testing, the data acquired during these pump tests?
Yes,
Yes. So in the hydro focus model report, they calibrate the model for the period from February 22nd, 2015 to January 2016. So that model, the transmissivity in that model was calibrated to the pumping test. In addition, in HWG TM2, there's a CMIX model also calibrate to the pumping test data during the same time period.
Okay, so I'm wondering though, the pump test went on until sometime in 2018, is that correct?
Correct.
So for Dr. Ye, for your subsequent 2022 modeling work, did you use the data acquired during the pump testing through 2018 to calibrate your new model?
Yes.
Okay, so is it basically the same process but using the full data set?
Yes. Just like for the previous two model calibration I mentioned, that is a daily time step. But the North Marina groundwater model 2022 is a monthly time step.
Oh, okay. Why is that different? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's really the number of stress period to be simulate, because the North Marina groundwater model simulate the time period from October 1979 to September 2019, 40-year period. So 12 months per year, that's 480 stress period.
Okay,
Yeah,
so times 30 would be a lot more.
Right, yeah.
I think it's important to note here that as far as aquifer tests and pumping tests, those are typically only done for as little as 4 hours or 8 hours or a day or 2 or 3 days. And that is normally more than enough time to calculate aquifer parameters. And the information gained from pumping longer than that, generally is not going to change your assessment of aquifer parameters in most situations. So just from a standpoint of using an aquifer test to, evaluate hydraulic conductivities, that's, typically done over a very short pumping period and is will give you similar results to if you did it for a longer period of time.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Okay, so I'm going to ask Ms. Mullen to put back up exhibit Cal 104, which was Mr. Leffler's slides, and to go to slide 21. Okay, so the last bullet on this slide states the slant wells capture zones do not intersect with any of the capture zones for the MCWD wells. Do you see that, Mr. Leffler?
Yes.
Do you have any figure that shows the locations of the capture zones for the MCWD wells?
No, I don't. I base that on looking at the location of the MCWD wells relative to the edge of the seawater intrusion front, and that they're very close. And I think I provided a couple figures, maybe in my rebuttal testimony, showing the pumping of those 3 MCWD wells relative to TDS concentrations and sort of the longer term history of pumping there. And, under, current conditions and historical conditions, those wells just cannot be pumped at very high rates without drawing in that leading edge of the seawater intrusion front. And, the capture zones for the slant wells are well seaward of that. So it's based on that they really cannot intersect without those MCWD wells being heavily impacted by seawater intrusion and being unusable in terms of the salinity of the water they would extract due to pumping at too high of a rate and drawing in that seawater intrusion front.
Okay, and I understand that, but I guess my question is, other than that, can you say anything about the locations of the capture zones of the MCWD wells?
No.
Okay. All right, let's go to exhibit Cal 3 again on page 32. Down to paragraph 87. And I'm going to read at lines 20 to 22. This states the amount of infiltrating rainfall on the CEMEX property is estimated to average 150 acre feet per year based on average rainfall infiltration of 5 inches per year over 370 acres. Do you see that?
Yes.
So is the area of the CEMEX property approximately 370 acres?
Yes.
And I don't think anybody covered this yesterday, but I was wondering about this. Can you do a calculation using that 370 acres and do it separately for the dune sand aquifer and the 180 aquifer if they're separate there, and using the specific yield and the average aquifer thickness? Could you calculate, this is sort of a theoretical question, the volume of water that is currently in the portion of the aquifer under the CEMEX property that could be pumped by wells? Just ignoring the fact that there'd be inflows and outflows, but just basically the specific yield amount for each of those aquifers in the portion under the CEMEX property. Is that a calculation that could be done?
Yes.
Okay. Is that something you can do on the fly, or is that something you'd need a little time to do?
Well, yeah, take a little bit of time to do that, but
okay. This is another. We asked you to get the EIR figure. This is another assignment I'm going to ask you to do over the break, if you can. Again, I'm not quite sure how to answer the court's question, but one way to answer it from my point of view was to see how much, I'll just say, groundwater under the CEMEX property in those aquifers that could be produced by wells. What's the volume of that amount of groundwater? Does that make some sense, or what I'm trying to say?
yes, yeah, I think so. I think my only caveat is that with the understanding that would be all brackish to saline water.
Oh, no doubt. You've made that very clear, and I'm not disputing that. So the volume of that brackish or saline water that could be pumped is what I'm talking about.
Right.
Okay, and then I may circle back. It's sort of a hypothetical question. Well, I'll just ask you now, and you can probably answer later. But then the next question would be, if the slant wells were operating, how many years would it take for them to pump that water out? With, of course, the understanding that that water would be replaced in the aquifer primarily by seawater coming in.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and again, if it's separate for the dune sand aquifer and the 180 aquifer, then do that separately for both. So, okay. So now let me just go forward. If we can, Ms. Mullen, put up exhibit Callium 6 and go to page 4. And the third paragraph, scroll down. Make sure, I may not have that. Let me just double check here. The problem of PDF pages versus other pages. I'm trying to, can you just scroll down so I can see what text page this is? Yeah, can you, I'm sorry, scroll down 3 pages. I want text page 4, which is PDF page 7, excuse me. Okay, there we go. And then this paragraph that you've got it right there. In the sentence that there's a heading for MCWD well impacts analysis. And the first sentence states, MCWD production wells pump primarily from wells screened in the deeper 400-foot aquifer and the deep aquifer. And then it goes on to talk about, well, the proposed MPWSP wells would pump exclusively from the shallow dune sand aquifer and the 180-foot aquifer. Do you see that?
Yes.
So what are the bases for your statement that the MCWD production wells pump primarily from wells screened in the 400-foot aquifer and the deep aquifer?
Yes. So they have, I believe it's 8 wells altogether. And if I'm recalling correctly, other than the 3 wells we've been talking about, 29, 30, and 31, which are reportedly screened in the 180 as well as the 400. The 5 other wells, I believe 4 of them are only screened in the deep aquifer, and 1 of them is screened in the 400-foot aquifer only. And they have provided pumping information for each of those wells. So if you assign, look at the amount of pumping from each of those wells, I think it works out to, on the order of, let's say 70% from the deep aquifer of their total pumping is from the deep aquifer. And then, then some of the remainder is from the 400-foot aquifer. And so that leaves, a small amount, a relatively small portion that could come from the 180-foot aquifer from those 3 wells that are screened in both the 180 and the 400.
Okay. Thanks. And then if Ms. Mullen, if you can go to exhibit Callium 79. And text page 26, which is probably a few pages off in the PDF. Okay, yeah, there we go. Okay, the first paragraph up on this page. Okay, thank you. So the third sentence in this paragraph states, some examples of seawater extraction barriers and or use of subsurface intakes for desalination plants have been studied or implemented in the following locations, and various locations are listed. Is there any CalAm exhibit that shows how these seawater extraction barrier projects work?
No, I think we prepared a specific exhibit on that was entered.
I'm sorry, you did or did not?
Did not.
Okay.
I know that that's something that's, being studied in a lot of detail right now for the 180, 400-foot aquifer subbasin GSP, and that they've, been developing an expanded model to take a look at that. So possibly in that GSP, and I believe, I know they recently submitted an updated GSP. But there could be a figure in there that might speak to that. But yeah, I don't think we have a specific exhibit in my testimony.
Okay, well, and then I'll ask that specific question. I realize that's still a project in the conceptual development stage, but have you looked at how CalAm's proposed slant well project might interact with such a GSP project to have the seawater extraction barriers?
I've, conceptually, I've thought about that and looked at where, that barrier would be. I haven't done specific modeling to that, but my opinion is that they would actually be very complementary to each other, and that this project could actually be part of what's being proposed in the GSP as a seawater extraction barrier, and so I think it would be a very complementary piece to that project.
Okay, but I assume that project is so early in development stages, you probably can't provide any more detail than just that, right?
Well, not at this time, but I'm sure that's something that will be coming relatively soon.
Okay. Okay, so let's get in. I do have questions about the modeling. So we can start with Exhibit CalAm 3. Again, Ms. Mullen, I appreciate your shifting back and forth between these exhibits, and go to page 9. And paragraph 29, lines 26 through 27. So, and I just want to make sure I understand this, and I know I don't right now, so please bear with me if these are simple questions. But this sentence, 2 sentences said, these modeling efforts include the use of 3 models, a regional model, the NMGWM, and a site-specific model known as the CEMEX model. All 3 models were operated in a transient mode. Do you see that text?
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, please explain to me what transient mode means.
So transient refers to, well, I guess we need to distinguish it from steady state. So transient refers to you're implementing a model that has, let's say, monthly time steps. And, so on a monthly basis, you can vary pumping and recharge and, certain of the inputs on the water balance. And then you say you run the model for a 20-year period. And, especially like in a place like California, where you have rainfall on a certain time of year and pumping concentrated a certain time of year, it will show you, how that varies monthly. And so it will reflect, the results of that will reflect, for example, seasonal features, like where you have more pumping and less pumping. And so it will reflect how water levels respond to that. And then year to year with, different types of climate and precipitation and stream flow, the hydrology will, maybe change things from year to year. And so the transient model, and you can look at from a certain point in time, well, what happens 1 year from now, or what happens 10 years from now? So you can, look at different time slices if you like. So that's distinguished from a steady state model, which is you're not varying all those parameters, recharge and discharge on a monthly basis. You're assigning an average value that you keep constant. And then you run the steady state model, and that's the result that you get is sort of an infinite time, after everything equilibrates. It gives you the results for, some distant time slice. And I don't know. So with that, if Johnson or Tim think.
Well, the steady state would be an infinite time slice, assuming that you had constant recharge and discharge during every month. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. I don't, Mr. or Dr. Ye or Mr. Well, sorry, you, Dr. Anything you want to add to that? Seems pretty clear to me.
Right, I don't have anything to add on.
Okay. All right. So let's go forward. I take it, are those the two modes that models can be run on, transient or steady state? I assume.
Yeah, I think those are the two main modes of operation.
Okay. So let's go to Exhibit CalAm 3. I think that's what we have up. Page 10, paragraph 33. I think that's the next page. Okay. The very last two sentences say the regional transient model is being prepared by HWG member Tim Durbin, and the local specific transient model is being prepared primarily by Johnson Ye. And we don't need to read the next page. So, Mr. Durbin, I think this was clear yesterday, but your technical memorandum is Exhibit CalAm 73. That's your technical memorandum for your 2022 work. If necessary, we can display that. But my general question is, does that describe the most recent regional transient modeling work that you've done for this project?
It does.
Okay. And my technical staff may want to try to get into the modeling. So I have a couple of technical questions. What for you, Mr. Durbin, what modeling software or interface is necessary to run that regional transient model?
The model is called FemFlow 3D, and which was originally documented in a USGS report, but that updating has been done by me since I was with the USGS, and so that updated user's manual is what they need.
And then do they need some specific software to run the model? FemFlow 3D is the computer code to run the model. So that's all they need to run it. There is a commercial package for displaying or for creating models and displaying model results
called GMS, and FemFlow 3D outputs files that can be used in this graphical interface to look at groundwater levels and changes in groundwater levels or whatever happens to be of interest. So
Okay.
to put most conveniently, they would have GMS, but it's not necessary.
Okay. And then did you provide, and if one of Cal-Am's attorneys needs to step in here, I just want to get to the bottom here, but basically, I'll start with you, Mr. Durbin. Did you provide the model files to your attorneys so they could provide them to Marina Coast and City of Marina's people, their attorneys and their technical experts, so that they could independently conduct the modeling work?
I provided the input and output files for the modeling work relating to, first of all, the model calibration, and then secondly, some of the scenarios. And I'm not sure. They were given to Dr. Ye, but I'm not sure where they went from there as far as the scenario outputs and inputs.
And did you also provide the user's manual and the FemFlow 3D, I'll say program?
I believe I provided the program, but not the user's manual.
Okay. And I'll just ask you, Mr. Moore, do you know, did you or one of your colleagues provide that information to Marina Coast and City of Marina's attorneys?
Unfortunately, I don't know, but Michael may, and he's on.
All right. Mr. Betts, go ahead.
I believe so, but I'm going to kick it down one more to Mr. Donlin.
Okay, Mr. Donlin, let's feel like we're playing rugby here. Go ahead.
I believe we provided all of the modeling input, output, scenario files that were requested by Marina and Marina Coast to council.
Okay. So I'm going to ask, for any of the Cal-Am attorneys who want to respond, can you provide that same information and those same files to the AHO so we can investigate that to the extent we think it's appropriate?
I'll take the answer, which is yes, of course, but I'll defer to, again, Mr. Donlin if he could technologically do that.
Okay, so Mr. Donlin, of course, we'll CC everybody on our request, but we will request, and I'm sure we will want the user's manual too. So if you can make arrangements with Mr. Durbin, I know enough to know a user's manual is a useful document here, so we'd certainly like that too. Okay.
Mr. Lilly, anticipating a question that you may have related to this, would your technical staff also like the North Marina groundwater model, or are they just looking for the regional model that Mr. Durbin?
No, actually, I was going to get to that, so you saved me a line of questions, but the answer is yes, we would like the same information for both. So thank you, Mr. Donlin. And I assume it's all the same answers that those files have been provided to Marina Coast and City of Marina's people as well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, so for you, Mr. Durbin, and again, this is such a basic question. I'm sorry for having to ask it, but how does your regional model simulate well pumping? And this will be, I'll say, throughout the Salinas Valley.
Let me explain a little difference between ModFlow, which you're probably familiar with, versus a finite element model, which FemFlow 3D is. And in ModFlow, you assign pumping by specifying in a given time period the amount of pumping from a particular cell in the mesh. In Simpler 3D, the equivalent is assigning a pumping value to nodes, which are sort of the equivalent of cell centers, and to those nodes, assigning the pumping rate for a given time period.
Okay, and how do you use actual pumping data to determine what numbers to input for the simulation of pumping?
Yes, the pumping data, for the most part, comes from the Monterey County Water Resources Agency pumping database.
Okay, so either for the mod flow or for the finite 3D, you can input the well pumping data into that. Is that correct? Okay,
Correct.
So does your model specifically input the historical well pumping data for Marina Coast Water District's wells?
Yes.
Okay. And another question my technical experts were wondering about, throughout the Salinas Valley and including in this area, there are some sand quarries, and my understanding is sand can be washed with fresh water, and of course there can be percolation associated with that. Does the regional model address that type of input?
No, it doesn't, because that's detail that is not necessary to create a useful regional model.
Okay. Okay, so we'll go to you, Dr. Ye, for what Mr. Leffler called the specific transient model. And I'll ask Ms. Mullen to put up Exhibit Callium 45 and go to PDF page 27. Okay, and this is figure 1 from this exhibit. And this is a fairly simple question, but I don't know the answer to it. So, or line of questions. So I've got to ask you. First of all, Dr. Ye, what does the large rectangle in this figure depict?
That's the model domain for the North Marina groundwater model.
And then what does the small rectangle in this figure depict?
That's the model domain for the CMAX model. It's a 2 mile by 2 mile square centered around the CMAX site.
Okay. So this technical memorandum, I'm sure you're familiar with it because you wrote it. If we need to, you can flip through it. But parts 3 and 4 of the memorandum that's Exhibit Callium 45 describe various scenarios. Are you familiar with that, at least generally?
Yes.
So are those scenarios did you run those for the entire NMGWM model area or just for the CMAX model area?
For the North Marina groundwater model area.
Okay. So then I guess when I'm going to ask you, Dr. Ye, although we can shift back to Mr. Leffler if we need to, but when he refers to the local specific transient model, is he referring to the MMGWM model or the CMAX model?
It's the North Marina groundwater model.
Okay, so in the exhibits you submitted for this proceeding, are those all for model runs for the MMGWM model?
Correct.
Okay, so did you do independent model runs for the CMEX model?
No. The last update for the CMix model was for that TM number 2.
TM number 2, what's the date of that? What year? Or if you have an exhibit number, that's even better.
I think I can answer that. My recollection is TM number 2 was 2017. I believe it was initially issued as its own document, might have a February 2017 date, but it's included as an appendix to the HWG technical report, which is, I think has an October or November 2017 date.
Okay. I'll see if those are exhibits or not. They may be. There are a lot of exhibits here, obviously, so we can follow up on that. So basically, for Dr. Yale, I'll just ask, I'll first ask, why did the prior modeling work focus on the CMEX model area as for separate modeling work?
So these two models right here are the 3 of the 2 models Mr. Leffler talked about earlier. That was the 2015 geoscience modeling work. So that time, the intent for the CMix site model is really for the well design, because the North Marina groundwater model cell size is 200 feet by 200 feet, 8 layer. I mean the 2015, 2022 it's 9 layers, and for the CMix model, we make finer model cell size and more model layers. So it's 20 feet by 20 feet for the model cell size. And also we self-divide the Dunsan aquifer into 3 model cell layers, and the 180-foot aquifer into 3 model layers too. So it's a total 12 model layers. So we can, do a very accurate model simulation for the stem well design.
Okay, but then you have not used the CMEX model for any of your subsequent work that's described in your testimony for this proceeding.
Right, not for the changing water levels or ocean water percentage.
Okay, all right, thank you. And I had some questions about the model. This is one question Mr. Donlan did not answer. Nothing wrong with this, Mr. Donlan. I wouldn't know the answer either. But Dr. Ye, what modeling software or interface is used to run your NMGWM model?
It's a ModFlow -NWT.
Okay, ModFlow -NWT?
Yes.
Okay, and did you provide that to your attorneys to provide to Marina Coast and City of Marina? I don't know if that's a specific version of ModFlow, but did you provide that?
We provide all the model input files and the output files. Not for that ModFlow NWT, but it's available from the USGS website. You can have all that document.
Okay, good. All right, well, I'll have my staff follow up on this and we'll see if we have any additional questions, but that is helpful. Okay, so if Ms. Mullen, if you can go to Exhibit Cal-Am 73, and we'll go to PDF page 26, I think. I want text page 20. Okay, and down in there's section 6.0, and if you can go down to the third paragraph. Okay, and this is from Mr. Durbin's report. It's a general statement. It says, as a second general principle, the importance of boundary conditions diminishes with distance from the geographic region of interest. First of all, Dr. Ye, do you agree with that general statement? That's for you, Dr. Ye. Do you agree with that general statement about the importance of boundary conditions diminishing?
I am not clear about this.
Oh, okay. Well, then maybe I should, Mr. Durbin, you're right there. You wrote this. Please explain what you mean with this statement here in this sentence of your report.
Yes. I might use a example of a different groundwater system, and as a way of answering the question. And it's an example that Peter referred to before when I think discussing hydraulic connectivity. Imagine you have a model of the San Joaquin Valley, and so the model covers all of the San Joaquin Valley, but the your area of interest is pumping by the city of Bakersfield. Now, the model simulation of what effects the city pumping might have, in this case, I think it's certainly sensible to imagine that what boundary conditions you put at the north end of the San Joaquin Valley have no effect. But if you kept reducing the size of the model and moved it to Fresno, it may or may not have effect. If you moved it to the edge of the boundary to the edge of the city of Bakersfield, it probably would have an effect. So we have a decrease as the boundary, sorry, in the negative of what I said, as the boundary gets closer and closer to Bakersfield, the importance of the boundary increases.
Okay, well, that certainly makes sense to me. So I'll just ask you while we're on you, Mr. Durbin, do you think the boundary conditions that were used in the NMGWN are appropriate considering where the proposed Calam slant wells are located and where the Marina Coast Water District wells are located? If you can answer, and if you want to defer to Dr. Ye, that's fine.
No, I can answer that question. I think the boundary conditions are adequate for the distances that I cite in this paragraph. And I might also say that some of these principles have important consequences for understanding the model calibration and how the uncertainties in the models might affect the opinion that I just gave.
Okay, so Dr. Ye, you've heard Mr. Durbin explain about what he's talking about the importance of boundary conditions. Do you have any further comments regarding the boundary conditions in your model, the NMGWM, for analyzing the effects of the Calam slant wells and particularly potential effects on the Marina Coast wells.
Yeah, I just have one more thing to add on. You know, any boundary effect for the North Marina model, you know, we address that by running the regional model. So we run that regional model first, so that provide a good boundary condition for my North Marina groundwater model.
Okay. And do you believe that okay, so you believe those boundary conditions were appropriate for your modeling work then?
Yes.
All right. And I don't know, have you also provided the files that you received from Mr. Durbin? Have you provided those to your attorneys to pass on to Marina Coast and City of Marina's team?
Again, I'll have to pass on that. I think Michael may know or Rob may know.
Okay, this is just the files of the boundary conditions, basically where the baton was passed from Mr. Durbin to Dr. Ye. I don't know, Mr. Don, can you elaborate on that?
I would have to defer to Dr. Ye on the specifics of what files were provided.
Okay. Do you know, Dr. Ye, if you provided to your attorneys the files you received from Mr. Durbin of these boundary condition data?
I think we only provide our model files, and all the information are included in our model files.
Okay. Well, we'll have to see if that includes the boundary conditions. Presumably you input those into your model.
Yes,
Well,
in the general header boundary package.
okay. All right. So Dr. Ye, a different question. My technical team says that there are different well packages that the Geologic Survey has for simulating well pumping within a model. Are you familiar with these different well packages?
Yes.
And which well package did you use to simulate well pumping in your model, the MMGWM?
For the model calibration run, we use a well package and multi-node well package.
I'm sorry, the what well package?
Multi-node well package.
Okay. And then do you use something different for so that's for calibration, but then do you use a different well package when you're actually doing the simulation runs?
The simulation only well package.
Okay. Does your model also have any simulations for the monitoring wells in the area?
Monitoring well data were used for the model calibration.
Okay, do you need a well package for the monitoring wells in the model or not?
No.
And does your model specifically simulate the historic pumping by Marina Coast Water District's wells?
Yes, we use the data provided by them for the period from 2004 to 2019.
And Dr. Ye, does your 2022 modeling work simulate any recharge from the coastal ponds in the City of Marina area into either the dune sand aquifer or the 180-foot aquifer?
All the recharge term were provided from the regional model.
Okay, I guess I didn't ask Mr. Durbin that question. Does your regional model have any specific recharge elements for the ponds in the city of Marina area?
No.
Okay, thank you. You're all doing great. Thank you for bearing with me here. Well, I want to go through one more line of questioning, and then it might be appropriate to take a break. I do still want to ask questions about the superposition model or approach, but let me see if I can finish the other line of questioning first, and then I'll give you a report on where I am. Ms. Mullen, if you can please post exhibit CalAm 56. Okay, and go to page 3, paragraph 10. And lines, yeah, there we go. So at line 26, there's a reference to exhibit CalAm 60, which is the Geoscience 2015 report. Do you see that, Dr. Ye?
Yes.
And were you involved in that Geoscience 2015 modeling work?
Yes.
So was that model an earlier version of the MGWM?
I would say that is the second model refinement to the 2008 model.
Okay. And I assume when you did well, let me ask you this. Did you do your initial model calibration work when you prepared the 2008 model?
Yes.
And then did you have to do additional calibration or recalibration for the 2015 model?
Yes. The 2008 model covered the calibration period from 1979 to 1994. Then in 2013, 2014, there are lots of field work to collect additional data, particularly for the Dunsan aquifer. I think there were 12 boreholes were drilled. So this 2015 model incorporate all that information and also extend that model calibration from 1994 to 2011.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go to exhibit CalAm 73 again and go to PDF page 24. Just a minute here. Okay, if you can scroll down, Ms. Mullen, please, to section 4.3. This sentence states the output from the calibration process is 4 sets of pilot point adjustment factor values, respectively representing horizontal hydraulic conductivity, vertical hydraulic conductivity, specific storage, and specific yield. Do you see that?
Is that
Dr.
addressed to me?
I think this is Mr. Durbin's report.
I know, yes, I understand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm just asking whether you see that.
Yes.
Okay, and then we'll scroll down to page 20, two pages down. And to the section called discussion. And this states, the purpose of the SVSM is to provide initial conditions and boundary conditions for the NMGWN. I assume, do you see that as well?
Yes.
So how did you determine the extent of your model boundary conditions for the NMGWN?
So initially, it's really based on some estimation for the project impact on the water level. That's a boundary. We think it's far enough. But we also know that boundary condition will affect the ocean water percentage. So that time we also want to have a regional model can provide the boundary condition for us.
Okay. So let's shift over to your technical report, Exhibit Caliam 89. And we'll go to, sorry, I'm just having to read a lot of things. So go to PDF page 81, which should be figure 13, or figure 43.
No.
Let's just double check. Is that figure 43? One more page down. I'm sorry, I guess I had the wrong PDF. There we go. So it's just a general question, Dr. Ye, but I don't see that this shows. Oh no, it does show the locations of the MCWD production wells. Is that correct?
Correct.
And those are the green circles?
Yes.
So is there any, do you have any concern that that these wells are close to the edge of the model boundary for this model, or the boundary of the area that is modeled in this model?
No, because we have the regional model. Every model we run the regional model first. So any effect on that pumping or whatever will reflect in the North Marina condition.
Okay. And if we can go down or go up to PDF page 54, which should be figure 15 if I have the right PDF numbers here. So this shows the different calibration wells, and some of them are
Yeah.
are close to the model boundaries. And my question is, do you have any concerns about these calibration wells being that close to the model boundary? And is it going to have influence from the input, the model boundary inputs you receive from Mr. Durbin's work?
Correct. Some of those calibration wells would be affected by boundary condition.
So you basically have to do the calibration to recognize that data. Is that correct? The calibration from the target well, the data from the target well?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, we're almost to noon, and I think I'm going to tell you where I'm planning to go. And this has taken a long time. As you can tell, it's detailed, and my questions aren't very sophisticated. I do have on superposition and then a couple of related questions. I have probably another hour's worth of questioning. I think that, and then I know Mr. Moore or one of the Cal-Am attorneys wants to do some redirect of these witnesses as well. And I want some time to confer with my technical staff. So what I'm going to do is take a break now and have us come back at 1:30. We will finish by we will definitely finish today, hopefully by mid-afternoon, but we just, this is important. This is our chance to go through it. We're not going to get together again until December with these witnesses. Of course, we'll get together next week for the other witnesses, but that's my plan. Anything anybody wants to cover before we log off? All right, hearing nothing, just a reminder, you do need to log off completely and then log back on for a new session using the same Zoom contact information. And let's do that at 1:30 today. Thank you.
Mr. Lilly, this is Mr.
Go ahead.
Assange. I just wanted to confirm if possible, you'd like Mr. Leffler to find the figure that might be in the FEIR about drawdown and capture zone. And second, if he can, you'd like him to calculate pumping volume on the CEMEX site. Is that two homework?
Yeah, those. Thank you, Mr. Assange, for reminding me. Mr. Leffler, are you clear on your two homework assignments for the noon break?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, thank you for reminding me of that, Mr. Assange, and thank you, Mr. Leffler, and we'll definitely get back to that. All right, everybody have a good break.